The Sky Warriors of World War II. The defining weaponry of World War II wasn't found in the tanks that crushed through Europe's ancient cities, nor in the battleships that prowled the vast Pacific. It was in the airplane, specifically the fighter plane, and in the hands of a rare breed of warrior who would revolutionize the art of aerial combat. These men fought their battles 20,000 feet above the earth, where the air was thin and brutal, where split-second decisions meant the difference between triumph and a fiery death, and where traditional rules of warfare meant nothing. In this realm of clouds and steel, 5 pilots would emerge to claim their place in history. Germany's Erich Hartmann, America's Richard Bong, Japan's Saburo Sakai, Britain's James Johnson, and the Soviet Union's Ivan Kozhedub. They came from different worlds: a farm boy from Wisconsin, a born samurai, a Soviet peasant's son, an RAF invalid turned ace, and a German tactical genius. But they shared one magnificent trait: the ability to turn the sky itself into their deadly canvas. Each would achieve more than 50 kills, paint the heavens with fire, and survive hundreds of missions when the average pilot's life expectancy could be measured in weeks. Their stories, woven together, tell us not just about the evolution of aerial warfare, but about the very limits of human courage, skill, and audacity in the face of impossible odds. This is the story of the 5 greatest fighter pilots of World War II, the men who turned the Blue Yonder into legend. Erich Hartmann, the Black Devil of the skies. The Soviet pilots called him the Black Devil. But Erich Hartmann was just 22 years old when he became the deadliest fighter pilot in history. His black-painted Messerschmitt Bf 109, adorned with a distinctive heart emblem, a lover's token from his future wife Ush, struck terror into Red Army squadrons. Yet behind the fearsome reputation was a tactical genius who lived by a simple philosophy: see, decide, attack, coffee break. Born in 1922 in Weissach, Württemberg, Hartmann first touched the controls of an aircraft at age 14 through Germany's glider program. His mother, Elisabeth Machtolf, was one of the first female glider pilots in Germany and had already planted the seeds of aerial mastery in her son's mind. By the time he joined the Luftwaffe in 1940, he had internalized the fundamental laws of aerial physics in a way that would separate him from his peers forever. The first time Hartmann faced combat, he nearly died. Chasing a Soviet fighter with reckless abandon, he burned too much fuel and barely made it back to German lines. His mentor, Walter Krupinski, grabbed the shaken young pilot by the collar and delivered the lesson that would define Hartmann's career: never fly straight and level for more than 30 seconds in combat. Hartmann transformed this near-death experience into his signature hit-and-run tactics: strike fast, strike hard, and never stay in a fair fight. His victories accumulated at a staggering pace. Flying up to 14 missions a day on the Eastern Front, Hartmann perfected the art of the ambush. He would hold his fire until he was so close to his target that he could not possibly miss, often approaching within 20 meters before opening fire. This technique was insanely dangerous. Debris from his exploding targets frequently damaged his own aircraft, but it was devastatingly effective. 7 times he reached the golden number of 100 victories. Pilots who achieved 25 kills were considered exceptional, but the psychological weight was crushing. "In the last 2 years, I never slept well," he later confessed. Every morning he vomited before his first mission. Yet by afternoon, he would be back in the sky, adding to his tally. His final count of 352 confirmed victories wasn't just a record. It was an impossibility made real through a combination of skill, discipline, and a mathematical understanding of survival. The Soviets placed a 10,000 ruble bounty on his head. They called his aircraft the Black Devil, not knowing that multiple planes bore his distinctive paint scheme, a psychological warfare tactic he employed to make the enemy think he was everywhere at once. In truth, Hartman's greatest victory wasn't in the number of planes he shot down, but in the number of pilots he kept alive. Of the young airmen he mentored, not one was lost under his command. When Germany surrendered in 1945, Hartman had flown 1,404 combat missions. The Soviets demanded his surrender personally, but he refused to hand over his men to the Red Army until he received assurances of their safety. His loyalty earned him 10 years in Soviet prison camps, where he continued to resist, organizing protests and refusing to be broken. When he finally returned to Germany in 1955, he helped rebuild the post-war Luftwaffe, passing on his hard-won wisdom to a new generation of pilots. By the time he died in 1993, Hartman's tactics and training principles had influenced fighter pilot doctrine worldwide. The Black Devil had become something else entirely, a testament to the proposition that in aerial warfare, intelligence and discipline could triumph over even the longest odds. His final victory count remains untouched, a record that, in the age of modern warfare, will likely stand forever. Richard Bong, master of the Pacific skies. The skies above the Pacific weren't meant for the P-38 Lightning. The twin-engine fighter, with its distinctive twin-boom design, was engineered for the cold air of Europe. Yet in the hands of a Wisconsin farm boy named Richard Bong, it became the deadliest American aircraft of World War II. While other pilots struggled with the P-38's quirks in the humid Pacific air, Bong mastered them, turning the plane's weaknesses into strengths. 24 years old, with a boyish grin and a talent for breaking rules, Bong caught General George Kenny's attention by buzzing Market Street in San Francisco and flying loops around the Golden Gate Bridge. Instead of grounding him, Kenny recognized the rare combination of natural skill and calculated audacity. He sent Bong to New Guinea with simple instructions: start killing Japs. In the tropical hell of the Southwest Pacific, where pilots faced not just enemy fighters but treacherous weather and mechanical failures, Bong developed a sixth sense for aerial combat. He could spot enemy aircraft at impossible distances and possessed an uncanny ability to predict their movements. His fellow pilots watched in awe as he routinely violated every tactical doctrine they'd been taught, yet emerged victorious time after time. The competition with Thomas Maguire drove both men to extraordinary feats. Maguire, brilliant and calculating, approached aerial combat like a mathematician. Bong flew on pure instinct. Their rivalry pushed America's victory count in the Pacific to unprecedented heights, though they never saw it as a competition. The important thing is not the record, Bong insisted, but stopping the enemy. Marjorie Vattendahl, his high school sweetheart, received his Medal of Honor ribbon in the mail with a note: "You'd better start learning to pin these things on properly." They married between his combat tours, their wedding making headlines across America. But it was their love letters that revealed the toll of combat. "Sometimes," he wrote, "I forget what normal feels like." His death came not in combat, but during a routine test flight in California. On August 6, 1945, the same day the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima, his P-80 Shooting Star malfunctioned on takeoff. America's greatest ace, with 40 confirmed victories, died testing the next generation of fighters he would never fly in combat. He was 24 years old. In Superior, Wisconsin, a museum holds his medals, his leather flight jacket, and the bent propeller blade from his final flight. But his true memorial lives in the training programs he helped develop, where his techniques are still taught to fighter pilots today. The farm boy who conquered the Pacific skies proved that American ingenuity, combined with raw courage, could overcome any technological gap. Saburo Sakai, Samurai Spirit in the Skies. Saburo Sakai carried two swords into combat, the katana of his samurai ancestors and his Zero fighter. In an era when most pilots relied on burst attacks from their machine guns, Sakai approached aerial combat like a master swordsman, his aircraft an extension of his body, every maneuver precise, deliberate, and lethal. This philosophy made him Japan's greatest surviving ace and led to his most extraordinary feat, flying 560 miles, half-blind and gravely wounded, guiding his damage zero back to base through sheer force of will. Born to an impoverished samurai family in 1916, Sakai entered the Imperial Japanese Navy at 16, pursuing the only path available to restore his family's honor. His instructors quickly recognized something remarkable. In 1937, he graduated first in a class of 70 pilot candidates, a feat made more extraordinary by his admission that he cheated death multiple times during training, learning the absolute limits of both aircraft and pilot. Flying the legendary A6M0, Sakai achieved a level of mastery that stunned even his enemies. He never lost a wingman in combat, unheard of in the Pacific War, and developed a unique style of aerial combat that emphasized survival over glory. His technique of using the Zero's superior maneuverability to force opposing fighters into a vertical spiral, where American engines would stall before the Zeros, became standard doctrine in the Japanese Navy. August 7, 1942 marked both his greatest trial and finest hour. While attacking what he thought was a torpedo bomber over Guadalcanal, Sakai was jumped by American Wildcats. A .30 caliber bullet shattered his canopy, destroying his right eye and paralyzing the left side of his body. Rather than bail out over enemy territory, he inverted his Zero, using gravity to stem the blood flow from his head wound, and navigated back to his base on Rabaul. He never lost consciousness during the 4-hour flight, despite being unable to see out of either eye for extended periods. Against military orders and medical advice, Sakai returned to combat after losing his eye, adapting his techniques to account for his limited depth perception. He scored additional victories, flying one-eyed, including a remarkable engagement where he outmaneuvered 8 American Hellcats without firing a shot, proving that survival itself could be a form of victory. The war's end found Sakai deeply transformed. The samurai, who had once lived by the code of absolute victory, became Japan's most vocal advocate for peace and reconciliation. He sought out the families of pilots he'd shot down, offering not apology but understanding, building bridges between former enemies. In 1945, he made a solemn vow to Buddha never to kill again, a vow he kept until his death in 2000. At his funeral, American and Japanese pilots stood side by side. They honored not just his 64 aerial victories, but his greater victory over the hatred of war itself. His autobiography, Samurai, became required reading at military academies worldwide, not for its combat tactics, but for its lessons about the true cost of warfare and the power of reconciliation. The Precision of Aerial Warfare, the story of James Johnnie Johnson. In the summer of 1940, as the Battle of Britain raged, James Johnnie Johnson sat frustrated in a hospital bed, recovering from a rugby injury that had shattered his collarbone. The delay likely saved his life. While the first wave of RAF pilots faced devastating losses against the Luftwaffe, Johnson used his convalescence to study every combat report he could find, developing theories about aerial warfare that would make him the Western Allies' most successful ace. His first kill nearly killed him. Wrestling with a stiff control column, the lingering effect of his rugby injury, Johnson pursued a Messerschmitt 109 over the English Channel. His guns jammed. The German pilot, sensing weakness, turned to attack. Johnson's survival that day came down to a perfectly timed split S maneuver that he'd practiced countless times in his mind during those hospital days. He learned 2 crucial lessons: maintain your aircraft meticulously and never enter combat without an escape plan. The Spitfire in Johnson's hands became something entirely new. While other pilots treated it as a pure fighter, Johnson saw it as a precision instrument. He modified his aircraft's gun sights, adjusted the wing-mounted cannons to converge at a specific range and developed a unique deflection shooting technique that allowed him to hit targets from angles other pilots considered impossible. His squadron's armory started loading his ammunition by hand, ensuring consistent ballistic performance that matched his extraordinary accuracy. Flying with the Canadian Wing in 1943, Johnson revolutionized large formation tactics. He developed the Johnson Weave, a combat formation that maximized the Spitfire's turning ability while protecting the entire squadron. German pilots reported that attacking Johnson's wing was like flying into a swarm of angry bees. His leadership style was equally innovative. He never ordered his pilots to do anything he wouldn't do himself, and he insisted that every pilot understand not just how to fight, but why each tactic worked. The night before D-Day, Johnson gathered his wing commanders. Instead of a typical briefing, he served them champagne in his quarters and discussed art, literature, and their hopes for after the war. The next morning, they led the largest fighter formation in history over the Normandy beaches. Johnson's wing didn't lose a single pilot that day. By war's end, Johnson had achieved 38 kills, all while leading one of the war's most successful fighter wings. He never lost a wingman in combat, and his aircraft was hit by enemy fire only once. His precision approach to aerial warfare revolutionized fighter combat training. The RAF still teaches his principles of deflection, shooting, and tactical leadership. An Arab proverb states that the more personal you make war, the better you'll be at it. Johnson made war personal by making it precise. In his memoirs, he never glorified the kill counts or the combat. Instead, he wrote about the mathematics of aerial warfare, the psychology of leadership, and the art of turning a machine of war into an instrument of precision. His legacy isn't in the number of aircraft he shot down, but in how he transformed aerial combat from a brutal brawl into a science. Even Kozhedub, the ace of aces. The skies over the Eastern Front witnessed the most savage aerial combat in history. In this crucible of steel and fire, Ivan Kozhedub emerged as the Allies' deadliest ace, achieving 62 confirmed victories in just 2 years of combat. Yet his most remarkable battle came in 1945, when he shot down 2 American P-51 Mustangs that had mistaken his La-7 fighter for a German aircraft, and then risked his life to prevent Soviet high command from using the incident as propaganda against the Western Allies. Born to peasants in Ukraine, Kozhedub's first experience with aviation came from watching crop dusters over his village fields. By age 18, he was teaching at a flight school, having discovered an innate talent for understanding aircraft behavior. When Germany invaded in 1941, he begged to be sent to the front. Instead, the Soviet Air Force kept him teaching for 2 crucial years, a delay that allowed him to master every aspect of aerial combat theory before facing the Luftwaffe's veteran pilots. His first combat mission in 1943 ended in disaster. Separated from his squadron, he was ambushed by 2 Focke-Wulf 190s. Kozhedub survived by flying his La-5 fighter into a cloud bank and emerging behind his pursuers, a maneuver he'd practiced countless times while teaching new pilots. He didn't score a victory that day, but he learned a fundamental truth. In aerial combat, position meant more than speed, and patience more than aggression. The La-5 fighter became legendary in Kozhedub's hands. He understood the aircraft's few advantages, its excellent visibility and robust construction, and developed tactics that maximized these strengths. His signature move involved allowing enemy aircraft to overshoot while chasing him, then using the La-5's superior low-speed handling to reverse the situation. German pilots called it the Russian's trap. April 19, 1945, marked his most extraordinary day. Patrolling near Berlin, Kozhedub encountered Germany's newest weapon, the Me-262 jet fighter. Conventional wisdom said propeller-driven aircraft couldn't compete with jets. Kozhedub proved this wrong by understanding the Mi-262's fatal flaw, its wide turning radius at high speed. He downed 2 of them in a single engagement, becoming the first Allied pilot to shoot down jet aircraft in combat. His post-war career proved equally dramatic. Sent to Korea as a secret advisor to Chinese pilots, Kozhedub developed new tactics for MiG-15 pilots facing American F-86 Sabres. Though forbidden from flying combat missions himself, his strategies helped reshape the air war over the Yalu River. His Chinese students called him the Sky Dragon Teacher. Stalin offered him the title Hero of the Soviet Union 3 times, a recognition no other Soviet fighter pilot achieved. Yet Kozhedub's personal logbook tells a different story than the official records. In it, he meticulously documented not his victories, but his mistakes, creating a manual of aerial combat wisdom that trained generations of pilots long after the war's end. When American test pilots finally met him in the 1990s, they discovered something remarkable. Kozhedub had created his own universal theory of aerial combat, one that transcended aircraft types and eras. His principles of energy management and positional advantage remain foundational concepts in fighter pilot training worldwide, proving that true mastery knows no ideological boundaries. The legacy of fighter aces in modern air combat. The age of the fighter ace ended not with a dramatic aerial duel, but with the quiet evolution of technology. Modern air combat, with its beyond visual range missiles and networked warfare systems, bears little resemblance to the intimate ballet of death these 5 masters practiced. Yet their influence echoes through every aspect of modern aerial warfare, from the design of fighter aircraft to the psychological training of pilots. These 5 men, Hartman, Bong, Sakai, Johnson, and Kozhedub, fought for different nations and causes, yet they shared remarkable commonalities. Each developed a 6th sense for aerial combat, treating their aircraft as natural extensions of their bodies. Each pioneered tactics that emphasized survival over glory. And perhaps most tellingly, each emerged from the war with a profound understanding that transcended national boundaries. That true mastery of aerial combat wasn't about killing, but about staying alive long enough to protect others. Their collective wisdom, paid for in blood and fire high above the earth, forms the foundation of modern air combat doctrine. In their contrasting approaches to warfare, Hartman's mathematical precision, Bong's raw instinct, Sakai's warrior philosophy, Johnson's tactical innovation, and Kozhedub's scientific analysis, we find the complete vocabulary of aerial combat, a language still spoken in the cockpits of 5th-generation fighters.